Nice.
Hey everyone, Genome here, coming to the next episode of my movie review series. This next movie that I'm going to be reviewing actually was a subscriber request. I don't normally take these, but this one actually, I don't know, triggered something in my mind saying, you must review this. So, all faux dramaticism aside, this one kind of goes back to the days of my childhood, and I can't resist nostalgia. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to talk about another of the 1982's Tron. Cult classic to the stars, innovator in the world of CGI, and basically just a leap off the proverbial edge for Buena Vista Pictures, otherwise known as Disney.
Within the NCOM 511 computer, there exists an unknown civilization, a startling new world.
So let's go ahead and get into this movie just a little bit, and I'll give you a real brief plot synopsis, then I'll give you the pros and cons, and I'll just go ahead and give you an overall score. Please be advised that there is some probably serious nostalgia lenses being watched with this movie, or you know what I mean. So I'll try not to let it skew my score, but it's really hard not to revisit this movie that I saw in the theaters when it came out and not kind of geek out a little bit. So the story is kind of interesting in the fact that it's incredibly simple and also incredibly convoluted. Long story short, this is a story about computer programs and what takes place in your computer, behind the scenes that we just all take for granted. As far as the time frame of this movie, it can take place in a microsecond, in 10 seconds of real time. Who knows how long it is? Not very long, probably, but you basically have a couple of good guy programmers, I guess white hats you would call them, and a bad guy programmer / thief, and then you have something that's called the Master Control Program. The Master Control Program is kind of like the main bad guy in this movie. It's almost like a self-evolving program that the regular real-world bad guy created, but it got out of hand, and there's some actual kind of disturbing undertones in the fact that it looks like it's trying to, like, Skynet. Basically, it's trying to, like, take over different aspects. It's talking about hacking into the Pentagon and to China and Russia.
Now, wait a minute. I wrote you.
I've gotten 2,415 times smarter since then.
So, yeah, there's that going on. So, but basically, the whole story revolves around Jeff Bridges, Kevin Flynn, trying to find evidence that the main bad guy, Ed Dillinger, played by Master Thespian, none other than David Warner, good friend of Patrick Stewart, that he stole basically five video games that Kevin Flynn had designed, right? And that caused this meteoric rise to the top of NCON, right? NCON being the, I guess, giant software company. It doesn't really say what it does, but they deal with lasers and they deal with computer software, so it's a giant hodgepodge of conglomeration, right? So this whole movie is basically a quest for Flynn to get this information so he can take his rightful place at NCON. Unfortunately, he runs afoul of both the main bad guy and Master Control. The MCP, like I said, it's basically taking over, and it's its own persona at this point. So Flynn makes an ill-advised attempt to hack in using stuff on the LAN, more on that later, and then is actually sitting in front of a gigantic laser that deconstructs him and puts him into the computer itself. We do see evidence that this laser works on matter as they deconstruct an orange and store it digitally somehow. Don't ask too many questions, all right? So Flynn wakes up basically as a prisoner program. He's now a computer program, right? He doesn't know this right away, but that's what he is. And he's stuck into gladiatorial games. So basically what this MCP is, that's the Master Control Program. From now on, I'm going to, make a nice acronym out of it. It's grabbing like software and programs, mostly really, from all over the interwebs. I assume it has an internet. I don't know. It's not really mentioned, but it's grabbing like basically underutilized programs from all over, and it's putting them into these like gladiatorial style games to, I guess, weed out the chaff.
Hey, look, this is all a mistake. I'm just a compound interest program. I work at a savings and loan. I can't play these video games.
And and then it takes the strongest ones to survive and incorporates it to himself. It's not really clear or spelled out in any way, but basically that's what he's doing to all those. And for the Flynn character, he sticks him into the games basically just to torment him, because Flynn is supposed to just get beaten up and then be decompiled, derez, as they call it in this movie. So it's a pretty convoluted way. It's very Bonzi and villain kind of bad guy behavior. And so from then on out, we have a series of adventures that Flynn, a guy named Ram, played by Dan Shore, and the other main protagonist, Tron, thus named after the movie, played by Bruce Boxleitner. Bruce Boxleitner also plays one of the good guy white hat programmers in the movie, Alan Bradley. Right.
Hey, who's that guy?
That's Tron. He fights for the users.
So, but they all, of course, they maintain their physical appearance in the world of Tron, right? Or in the world of the computer. So, yeah, basically this entire movie is a fetch quest to get to the MCP, to use the Tron program, because Tron is actually programmed to take over other programs, sort of, kind of. It's vague, but it's there.
What's the project you're working on?
Well, it's called Tron. It's a security program itself, actually. It monitors all contacts between our system and other systems.
So he's on a mission to get there, and then Ram and Tron and Flynn all team up to do it. And later on, we're joined by Yori, who's played in the real world, last of the white hat programmers. Her name is Laura in the real world, and she's played by Cindy Morgan. I think, if memory serves, she's the girl that played the hot niece in Caddyshack. So, yeah. So, lots of adventures going on, lots of chases and near escapes and near misses, and finally we wind up at Master Control for the big final showdown. Now, I don't want to ruin this movie for someone who hasn't possibly seen this. I mean, I guess there's some people out there, maybe you haven't seen it because it's so old. It can happen. It's like I said, it came out in 1982, so it's a little bit past its shelf life, right? But so yeah, so we're treated to a big finale where the MCP is basically faced off by Tron and Flynn simultaneously. It's interesting, okay? Along the way, we're treated to massive amount of very unique visuals, lots of computer jargon, and very little bit in the way of character building. So I don't want to ruin the whole movie for you. I'm going to try to keep this one a little shorter than I normally make them, and let's just get on to the pros and cons of this movie, all right? So let's start with the cons first, all right? This will be a little more like telling of the actual film. So cons, the story is paper thin.
Clue.
Yes, sir.
Clue, we don't have much time left to find that file. This is top priority.
Yes, sir, I know, sir.
This isn't just correcting my bank statement or phone bill problem again. This is a must.
I understand, sir.
No.
At the same time, it's very convoluted and hard to follow. Like I said, it's just a fetch quest, and it's just a standard movie, Good guy fights the bad guy at the very end, it's a big build-up to that. There's more going on here. There's a lot more going on, and there's some cool themes going on. I'll get that into the pros, but yeah, the story is kind of wacky, and actually all the character development is basically done in the outside. And once you get to the inside, there's no real traits for these characters. There's no real motivations other than get to the MCP. I think some of that is intentional because these are supposed to be programs, computer programs. So they're not going to be highly emotive or really have any other function other than do what they are currently doing, right? But it's a little bit of bleed over back and forth, especially with Flynn. He's very, he's just as animated on the inside as on the outside. Jeff Bridges really does try in this role, right? Some more cons. Some people probably won't be fans of the visual style. I personally like it, but, it is an acquired taste, and it is different, and, especially at the time, some people were kind of turned off by it, but it's a huge, undertaking to do in the visual style that they did it, so... But yeah, the visuals can be a little bit dated and hard to look at for some people who are not wearing nostalgia glasses, right? If you're just showing it to a person now and they don't have much appreciation for nostalgia, they probably wouldn't care for the look of it too much. But I don't think that's what dates this movie the most, actually. I think it's actually the music in this movie that dates it the most. I really wasn't crazy about most of the soundtrack. I expected lighter synth work. This one is huge, dripping sponges of synth. Wah, 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 wah. It's almost like a synth steam organ or something in a huge cathedral, man. It's a little too big, and it does sound pretty dated. If you listen to Kraftwerk about this time, they sounded infinitely better than most of the soundtrack that was used here, and it was all done on a computer too, right? Once again, we're talking about limitations of technology at the time, but yeah, it really kind of dates the movies in some ways. There is a very distinct cutoff from more standardized soundtrack noises and music in the real world into the computer realm. So I definitely take that into consideration, but it was just too heavy-handed. I think it should have been more subtle, more ambient, right? Like I said, the characterizations, they're okay. David Warner is pretty good as a bad guy, but doesn't have a lot to work with. You know what I mean? He's either... Sark, the dignified yet very intense bad guy, or he's the dignified and very intense Ed Dillinger in the real world.
You will each receive an identity disc. Everything you do or learn will be imprinted on this disc.
Not much difference between the two, except he yells a lot more in the computer, right? Bruce Boxleitner is not the most emotive actor in the world, but once again, I'm not going to hold this against him because he's playing a programmer here. My goodness, not all programmers are highly animated, demonstrative creatures, right? So he's very much Tron-like on the real world as he is in the computer world, right? Sidney Morgan smiles a lot, kisses a lot, seems quite helpful, but not a whole lot's done with her. Really the only one, actually technically two, but only two people in this movie really get a chance to flex a little bit, and that's Dan Shore as Ram. He's very lovable. You barely see him in this movie, but he's kind of a lovable guy, doesn't seem very computer-like, because you see all of his stuff in the computer world. And then, of course, Jeff Bridges playing Kevin Flynn. He has definitely that mischievous look in his eye at all times, like you expect, what do they call those guys? Like a freelance, programmer would be, and just kind of, and he's a real free spirit, and it's a good role for him. He adds some much needed life into this movie, but it's not really enough to bring most of the overall acting out of just the kind of banal thing. But once again, that might have been some purposeful direction. So, yeah, story's kind of blasé. The visuals can be hit or miss depending on what you like. I wasn't a fan of the music, really, and this movie just wasn't too fun. I get satisfaction out of watching it. Some of that might be, once again, nostalgia kicking in, but this movie can be a little bit of a slog. I'm not going to lie. Imagery aside and all that, they do some things that make it not so much difficult, but they just make it kind of a chore to watch sometimes, right? More on that in the final here. So there's mostly the cons out of the way. Let's get into the pros. My gosh, do I need to even say it? This movie is a visual tour de force, and while it may not be everyone's taste, you have to give appreciation for what the filmmakers accomplished in this. It's a huge undertaking. They had to paint these cells frame by frame. Just an incredible amount of work went in this. Every shot had to be completely carefully planned, and that's just like the standard shots of people walking around like in their uniforms or whatever in the computer. It says nothing about the CGI they use. CGI actually doesn't look too horrible. Does not look as bad as you think it would for being as old as it is. What we got, 82? So what? Almost 40-year-old movie. believe me, it does not look as bad, nearly as bad as it could. It's just so striking visually looking. Yeah, there's no saying it there's no like denying that from, like I said, either the CGI that's involved, what they have, like 5 megs of RAM back then to work with. It was probably melting the computer just to make some of these shots, right? And you got more computing power today on your key fob for your vehicle. But, they did, and there's actually, it's used quite a lot, extensively through the movie. You would think it'd be very sparing, just like little snippets of it here and there, but there's actually a lot. I think there's like 20 minutes of pure CGI in this movie, so that's quite impressive. And like I said, the visual style of the movie itself looks great. I love the costumes. I love the bright, vibrant colors that against the bleak backgrounds. It just works. Some of the city and skyscapes look really cool. A little bit desolate, but, once again, you couldn't just put all that in there like you can now. Computing limitations, of course. There's a really cool scene. I love the scene where they find the pure energy pool and they start drinking it, and it's like a drug to them, right? But it just looks really cool and it's very striking visually.
Oh, boy, you forget how good the power feels till you get to a pure source.
I like scenes like that, and it's a cool one. Who could possibly forget the light cycle race? Looks incredible. It's tense. It's great, man. I remember this from the video game too, the arcade game.
Leader. Copy, Blue Leader. This is Gold 1 to Gold 2 and 3. Split up. Take them one on one.
Just, it looks amazing. And to go with the looks of this, the sounds that are used for the most part are extremely cool. I like the noise that the freaking, I forget what they call it, detectors or whatever, the big M's looking things, fly around. I like the noise they make.
They don't see it.
The light cycles make a really cool noise, right?
Ready? Ready.
Even that, the sky ship, whatever it is, looks like a boron sail kind of thing, right? That's used toward the end. It has a cool sound to it. I think the absolute coolest sound in this entire movie, though, is the death noise that comes from, like, when you derez the program, right? And it goes... It's so cool, man. I love it. I like the little noise that the discs make when they throw back and forth. Just a lot of good sounds, ambient sounds, and physical sounds in this movie. Something else that's a pro is the idea of this movie. What takes place inside a computer. You're in the real world. What's going on in there? It's very, very inventive, and it's a cool way of looking at it. It's like, hey, there could be like little civilizations in there. We wouldn't even know it, Heck, they even got like little, like I said, nods to everything. Like I said, the best friend of Flynn is named Ram in the game, right? Or in the computer. He's got a little, you don't see him very much, but this tiny little sidekick named Bit. He says yes or no, yes or no. That's all he is, because he's on or off, right? He's a bit. He's a 1 or a 0.
Yes. You mean yes? Yes.
Just a lot of cool imagery and a lot of surreal 3D landscapes. So, that the visual aspect is just what sells this movie, and it was just pretty far ahead of its time as far as that goes. Maybe too far ahead of time for its own good, but so it's a joy to look at, I'd say, and has good sounds and a really interesting premise. So there's some pretty strong cons, not to mention nostalgia factor. Like I said, I saw this in the theater when it came out. I was 6 years old. Looked incredible. We'd never seen anything like it. We didn't see anything like it for ages afterwards. 2010 when they made the remake or whatever, and there was still not really another movie that looked anything like it. So let's just get into the overall. So this movie is very hard to rate. Because if you take away the nostalgia, there's not a whole lot there. It's a visual treat, but the story's pretty weak. A lot of the characters are uninteresting. The quest is not exactly exciting in places. There's a few, minor chuckles to be had here, but it's not like a laugh fest either. And other than Jeff Bridges, no one really comes alive in this movie. Once again, some of that might be purposefully acted that way, but I don't know. Like I said, he's about the only one that really stands out here. And I can see why people had a hard time with this movie. This movie was a box office kind of failure. It was a bomb, not of epic proportions. And I know it turned into a cult classic later, but it didn't do well in the theaters when it came out. Because I think the problem was, the director, to his credit, goes through great pains to keep this like a computer lover's movie. And they use the lingo and everything. RAM, ROM, CROM, program names, program talk. And it's really basic program talk, right? But you got to remember the time. There's no such thing as a PC back then. Computers were not a household name. Like that says in some of the special features, people saw computers as gigantic mainframes. Huge things. And now you got them talking back and forth together, mixing computer lingo in with regular everyday lingo, and I think a lot of people just didn't understand it, you know what I mean? They didn't know what a bit or a byte was. They didn't know what RAM was. They didn't know what clocking was, derez or decompile. They didn't know any of that stuff for the most part. So that only really appealed to the tech nerd, the serious tech nerd back then, not even the casual one, because they're the only ones that knew about it. So I can see it really turning off some audiences. It seems laughable now because this is all in our lexicon, things like program and all that, but it really wasn't back then. So that was one of the problems the movie had, and the movie dragging at spots probably, it looks like they're going for the popcorn, summer popcorn crowd, but this movie was not written like a summer popcorn movie outside of the action scenes and visuals. The dialogue was just too technical for a lot of people, I think. Plus the look might have turned some people off who just weren't used to that style of imagery, right? So yeah, it didn't do too well at the box office, but I don't think it's deserved it. I think that even though this movie has a lot of faults, that it definitely is an important movie. This is back before Disney became the disgusting creature they are today, and they actually took a chance on this movie. This was a big chance, big budget movie on a really wacky idea. It probably should have been tested a little more with the scriptwriters and all that to see how it was going to pan out with people, because I don't think the world was quite ready for it yet. 10 more years down the road, with improved technology and vastly improved knowledge for the general public, would have probably helped this movie. But hey, it is what it is. It was, like I said, a visual tour de force, and I will have to integrate that into my grade. So let's go ahead and get it down to it. What grade would I give Tron? Well, I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 5. This movie is more like a 2, honestly, but I'm going to give this thing like a half nostalgia point and a half point just for the incredibly complex visuals that were given. Well, it's just, they read up about how they actually did this film, to achieve the look they did, and it was a mammoth undertaking, and I had to give half a point just for that much effort. They had a vision, they didn't cheap out on it, and they got it realized. It's mostly hits. There's some misses, of course, and some of it looks a little dated, but that's any movie that we tried to make things look futuristic. I will say this before I close. One pitfall this movie does not fall into is trying to make this look uber futuristic, right? That's when things start looking dated, like the Starship Enterprise, for example, the bridge that in the 60s. That's supposed to look futuristic, and it looks laughable nowadays, right? It's even like Next Generation stuff that looks laughable. It's like the technology is nowhere near what it should be. They didn't really do that here. Here, you don't know what's going on. It's more like a real world inside, and there's definitely a lot of different imagery, but there's nothing in there that would incredibly dated. You know what I mean? Just by the visuals of it.
No offense, but what the hell are you talking about?
I know you're going to see it and know it's an older movie. Whatever. I'm not going to belabor that point anymore. But I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It's a nostalgia tour de force. If you can look past some of the bland characters and kind of so-so story, and maybe some of the slower bits in this movie, it's worth a watch. This is one of the few movies I would say that it's worth watching on mute.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Just to get an idea of the amount of care and craft that went into making this movie look like it did. So, hey, that's what it's going to be, 3 out of 5. A little better than average, and a huge risk on the part of the filmmakers. And I'm just amazed that it got made, and amazed that it turned out as good as it did, at least visually in some sound departments. So anyway, thanks for watching. By the way, that review was for Master Blaster. He was he's the one that suggested it to me, so hope you liked the review. So anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more review content coming up in the near future, because you know me, if I can review it, I will do it. More Star Trek review content coming up, comic book review content. I have my next horror franchise picked out. I'll be announcing that here in a few days. And yeah, that's it for now. So until next time, this is Genome, wishing he could trade in his Harley Davidson for a light cycle. Out.